The Stafford Voice.
Profiles in History. It was the night of April 18th, 1775. He stood watching through a window dressed in a nightshirt as the British troops marched past on their way to Lexington and Concord. Some of the soldiers broke away from the main unit, heading toward the inn in Menotomy, Massachusetts. Because he was a member of the Massachusetts Provisional Congress and in opposition to the British, he would likely have been a target, so he fled out the back door of the inn and hid in a cornfield. Elbridge Gerry was born on July 17th, 1744, in Marblehead, Massachusetts. He was first educated by private tutors and attended Harvard shortly before turning 14, receiving his master's in 1765 before entering the family business. Now, he became a successful merchantman while in the family business as they were exporting dried cod to the West Indies and Europe. It was around this time when he became interested in politics. Elbridge was an early vocal opponent to Parliament's efforts to tax colonies after the end of the French and Indian War in 1763. He soon sat on the Marblehead Committee in 1770 that sought to enforce importation bans on British goods. In May 1772, he won election to the General Court of Province of Massachusetts Bay, where he worked closely with Samuel Adams to advance colonial opposition to parliamentary colonial policies. He helped establish Marblehead's Committee of Correspondence, but an incident of mob action prompted him to resign from the committee the following year. Gerry re-entered politics in 1774 when Marblehead became a port where relief supplies from other colonies would be delivered. He would be elected as a representative to the First Continental Congress in September of 1774, but refused as he was still grieving the loss of his father. Elbridge was elected to the Provincial Assembly, which was reconstituted as the Massachusetts Provincial Congress after Governor Thomas Gage dissolved it in October of 1774. Now, while there, he was assigned to the Committee of Safety and was responsible for assuring the province's limited supplies of weapons and gunpowder stayed out of British hands. It was his actions that were partly responsible for the storage of weapons and ammunition in Concord, which were a target of a British raiding expedition that sparked the start of the American Revolutionary War with the battles of Lexington and Concord in April of 1775. Now, although Elbridge Gerry was a skinny man and spoke with a bit of a stammer, his poor speaking skills never stopped him from voicing his opinion when called as a delegate representing his state, Massachusetts, in the Continental Congress. His friend John Adams called him, quote, a faithful friend and an ardent, preserving lover of his country. He served in the Second Continental Congress from February 76 to 1780 and was very, very influential in convincing a number of delegates to support the passing of the Declaration of Independence. Now, after its passing, Benjamin Harrison was caught joking with him about what would happen if they were captured by the British, saying, quote, I shall have a great advantage over you, Mr. Gerry, when we are all hung for what we are doing. From the size and weight of my body, I shall die in a few minutes, but from the lightness of your body, you will dance in the air an hour or two before you're dead. Summing up his work during the convention, Adams said, quote, if every man here was a Gerry, the liberties of America would be safe against the gates of earth and hell. Elbridge consistently advocated for a strong delineation between states and federal government powers. He sought to maintain individual liberties by providing checks on government power that might abuse or even limit those freedoms. And while working at the 1787 Constitutional Convention, he argued many points, even being labeled a maverick as he would often be found flip-flopping. However, in the end, he chose not to sign his name to the document, being the Constitution, that is. One reason was because he felt the vice president shouldn't be the head of the Senate. But the main reason for his objection was the lack of a Bill of Rights. He expressed his opposition, publishing a widely circulated letter where he was attacked in the press, with Henry Jackson being exceptionally vicious, saying, quote, "Gerry has done more injury to this country by that infamous letter than he will be able to make atonement in his whole life." The opposition didn't last. The New York Daily Advertiser in April of 1789 said he had, quote, "become the avowed friend of the Constitution." Now, President Adams sent him, along with Charles Cotesworthy Pinckney and John Marshall, to try and make peace with France. The French foreign minister at the time was seeking bribes from the United States through intermediaries, later referred to as the XYZ affair. Now, Americans were enraged, and Gerry stayed in France to try and smooth things over. With his eventual return, Elbridge would run for governor of Massachusetts several times before he eventually succeeded in 1810, 11, and 1812. During his last term, party leaders redrew the voting district lines to limit the opposing party to only one district. The shape of that district was so distorted that it actually looked like a lizard, giving rise to the term gerrymander, which is a process by which electoral districts are drawn with the aim of aiding the party in power. The following year, he would be defeated, which would only free him up to run as vice president for James Madison's second term as president. He was inaugurated as vice president on March 4th, 1813. Just 1 year and 8 months later, Elbridge Gerry was on his way to preside over the Senate, a duty he had once argued against. On November 23rd, 1814, he suddenly fell ill while visiting Joseph Norse of the Treasury Department, dying not long after returning home. He died penniless and was buried at the expense of the public, and is the only signer of the Declaration of Independence buried in Washington, D.C. John Adams said Gerry, quote, "devoted himself, his fortune, and his family in the service of his country." And that is this week's Profiles in History.